The year given to the end of the Roman presence in Britain is usually 409. Okay. Her gotan a brecon Romaburg a nevre sidan Romane ne Richardon on Bretone. Yeah, here the Goths broke off, something like this, Rome, Rome borough, and never since the Romans ruled in Britain, something like that. Yeah, double negation is, of course, emphasis. So the Goths sacked Rome, and never since the Romans ruled in Britain. So what is the connection here? The connection is, of course, that the Goths sacked Rome, and the Romans gave up their northern provinces in order to protect the heartland of the empire. Okay, so they gave up this rock in the north of Atlantic and took their legions down to Gaul and Italy in order to protect the core of the empire against the Vandals and the Goths and the others. Okay, we talked about that. This is here a romanticized painting, but here you see the Goths, of course, tearing down Roman statues in Rome, and this is the end, symbolized the end of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the Middle Ages. Okay, for cultural reasons, there's one date I find particularly interesting. This is 418, because the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle gives us the following. 418. Her Romane gesomedon alta gold hord se umbetine wedon an sum on iorthan ahidon, that hinenik mon sidan findan ne mechte, an sum mit him on Gallia ledon, which translates into something like, here the Romans collected, the German sammeln is still there, all the gold that in Britain was, the gold hoard. It's a plural, that was in Britain, and some they hid in the earth, that no man might since then find them. The gold hoards, whatever. And some with them to Gaul brought. Let's translate this in a more idiomatic fashion. This year, the Romans collected all the hoards of gold that were in Britain, and some they hid in the earth, so that no man afterwards might find them, and some they carried away with them into Gaul. I chose that one here because it's corroborated by archaeological findings. I mean, this is one of those gold hoards they just found recently, an amphora full of Roman gold coins, and it's beautiful that sometimes history or old historical writing is in a way corroborated by archaeological findings. Okay, this would be some of these gold hoards that the Romans hid because they could not take it with them. They hid in the earth before they left for Gaul. Okay, now we come to the important bit here, the Anglo-Saxon conquest. The Anglo-Saxon conquest, which followed the leaving of the Romans. And here we already see two Germanic longboats landing on the British Isles. If there's one date you have to know of the Dark Ages, it's that one, 449. Because this is when Anglo-Saxon Britain starts, or probably the beginning of England, if you like. 449. And what happened? Here Hengest and Horsa from Wirtegjarn, je lathade Bretta Könninge, je zoogten Brettene, on tham stave, there is je nemet Ipswins fleot. Whatever that is. Erdest Brettum to Fulton, Aki eft on he fuchton. Okay. Here, Hengest and Horsa, from Vortigern, the British king invited. They were invited by the British king, sought out Britain in a place which is called whatever, Ipswins Fleot. Since we don't know what it is, it doesn't matter. Yeah, first to help the Britons, but then they fought against them. Now, once again, more idiomatically, in this year, Hengest and Horsa, invited by Vortigern, king of the Britons, to his assistance, landed in Britain in a place that is called Ipswin's Fleet, whatever, first of all to support the Britons, but they afterwards fought against them. And this is the story which has been reiterated ever since. Two warriors, Germanic, Anglo-Saxon warriors, Hengest and Horsa, which means stallion and horse, named after the most important animals in those days, were invited by the British king called Vortigern to help the Brits against the Picts. Sorry. And you have to see this. I mean, the Picts, when the Romans left, I mean, they crossed Hadrian's Wall and pressed into, if you like, British territory. And the Brits were not very much used to fending for themselves. I mean, they had the Romans doing dirty bits for them for centuries. And so when the Picts came, their king, Vortigern, called some friends from the other side of the channel to help them against the Picts on the Angles and the Saxons, Hengest and Horsa. They came, drove off the Picts, yes, did their job, but then they decided to stay, and this is the story, decided to stay and turned against their own hosts. Very much romanticized, but these illustrations are corroborated by archaeological findings. I mean, you see the Sutton Hoo helmet on the left, excavated, and then some of the battle gear of Anglo-Saxon warriors. The important bit is they still look more Roman, ancient, than medieval knights. I mean, imagine, we are talking about 5th, 6th centuries here. Knights do not appear before the 12th, 11th, probably, 12th century, something like this. So they are much closer to Emperor Augustus than they are to a medieval knight. And this is what they look like. So mail shirts, those skirty thingies, and they're very distinctive. Helmets and broadswords. Okay, and how did the conquest proceed? How did it proceed? The thing is that we have almost no Celtic influence on Anglo-Saxon. So what does this tell us? So usually if you conquer different people, I mean, and if you live close together, you will adopt part of their language, at least words. I mean, all they adopted is toponymy, Dover, Thames, London, and so on. It's all of Celtic origin. But, I mean, we don't have any words in Old English which are clearly identifiable as Celtic. As and been, but it's very contested. So what does this tell us about the conquest? Well, two things certainly happened. Deportation, sorry for that, driving the Celts away or killing them. Well, third possibility is enslaving them, but certainly they were not on equal terms. Otherwise, the languages would have at least influenced one another. At least, I mean, there would be some influence of Celtic on Anglo-Saxon or Old English. There is none. Beda Venerabilis, the most learned man of his times, in his Historia Ecclesiastica Gentis Anglorum, which means the church history of the English people, mentions those days as well, and he says how the Angles, being invited into Britain, at first drove off the enemy, but not long after, making a league with them, turned their weapons against their allies. And this is what Beda wrote about in 731, in retrospect, what happened 200 years before his times. This is the entry. written in Latin, of course, originally, but here it says, in 449, the nations of the Angles or Saxons, being invited by Vortigern, arrived in Britain with 3 ships of war on the pretext of fighting in defense of their country, whilst their real intentions were to conquer it. Accordingly, they engaged with the enemy, who were come from the north, those were the Picts, to give battle, and the Saxons obtained victory. When the news of their success and of the fertility of the country and the cowardice of the Britons reached their own home, a more considerable fleet was quickly sent over, bringing a greater number of men, and these, being added to the former army, made up an invincible force. Okay, so, I mean, they were there, realizing that, well, it's a very fertile land, I mean, let's stay, and then they called their friends and relatives over from the north of Germany, who came in droves, and then the Anglo-Saxon conquest proceeded of the British Isles. The first commanders are said to have been the 2 brothers, Hengest and Horsa, stallion and horse, you mentioned that. Then having on a sudden entered into a league with the Picts, whom they had by this time repelled by force of arms, they began to turn their weapons against their allies. So he even says, I mean, they had a league with those fierce warriors from the north, whom we don't know who they were, probably not even Indo-European, okay, the Picts. Okay, in short, the fire kindled by the hands of the pagans, that's the important thing, the Anglo-Saxons not Christianized yet, proved God's just vengeance for the crimes of the people. Public as well as private buildings were overturned, the priests were everywhere slain before the altars, no respect was shown for office, the prelates with the people were destroyed with fire and sword, nor were there any left to bury those who had been thus cruelly slaughtered. That's Beda, he's a monk, of course, and he writes that for him the worst thing is, of course, I mean, he's Anglo-Saxon himself, okay, but he's on the side of the Celts because they were Christians and they were occupied by this heathen, pagan army of Anglo-Saxons who had no respect for anything Christian and just destroyed churches and saints and relics and whatever you have. Of course, this is written from the perspective of a Catholic monk, okay, and he is, of course, very much on the side of the Christians, even though he is of Anglo-Saxon stock himself, okay, Beda, Venerabilis, who will, of course, occupy us later on. Okay, some of the miserable remnants being taken in the mountains were butchered in heaps, others spent with hunger came forth and submitted themselves to the enemy to undergo for the sake of food perpetual servitude if they were not killed upon the spot. Some with sorrowful hearts fled beyond the seas, others remaining in their own country led a miserable life of terror and anxiety of mind among the mountains, woods and crags, and there he corroborates what we said before. Yeah, so enslavement, or driven out, and the funny thing is, he even says they left for the continent, and this is true. Yeah, so the Celts were driven further west, and you still have them up to the present day in Wales, Cornwall. Cornish, the Cornish language only died out 200 or 300 years ago. And some of them fled to the continent, where you still speak Celtic up to the present day in Brittany, which is called Brittany because the Britons weren't there, the Celts, okay, fleeing from the Anglo-Saxons and having a dukedom there. Armorica and some even to Spain, okay, Galicia, which is still Celtic up to the present day. So those were the days, yeah, either enslavement, okay, killing them, or driving them away. And up to the present day, modern genetics tells us that the further west you go in the British Isles, the more Celtic the people become. Okay, let's stop here and take it up from here later on.